Well, I'm Andrew Hladky, and I'm a British American artist. I grew up in Cambridge, England, and moved over here to Philadelphia about 8 years ago now, and then moved to the DC area just before the pandemic hit. And yeah, so have been here ever since. But yeah, thank you for coming to my exhibition and my talk. So I'll describe my process first of all, and I might point at bits of the painting while I do, just to make things clear. So I make these sculptural paintings. They're made from oil paint and bamboo stick. I use bamboo sticks to paint with. They're just what you might barbecue with, those types of sticks. I sharpen them first of all to get a good point and collect all the sharpening. So the first stage, when I'm building, I'll have my panel laid flat and I build a sculptural surface. So I'm squeezing worms of paint straight from the tube. That's what these things are. And then I use the sharpenings from the bamboo sticks I coat them in paint, split them apart into fine fibers, coat them in paint, and build lattice work structures that you can kind of still see protruding from this surface. I just build forms that I find appealing or strange, sinister or kind of seductive in their goopiness. But when it's reached a certain point that I'm happy with, I put them upright on an easel and I start to use the bamboo sticks to paint imagery into the surface. So I scoop up tiny bits of oil paint and put on dots and lines of paint. And then I will go back and forth, like building up the sculptural side, building up the forms, and then doing more work on the imagery, trying to get the imagery more like tighter and more focused. I like to keep the two sides of the work separate from one another. So I see the sculptural build-up of paint as being like the body of the painting, like just the materials and processes that make it the physical body of it. And so it's very important that these are, the worms of paint are the most direct mark I can make with a paint tube. It's just the material squeezed straight out. And then the bamboo sticks are what I paint with. And I like the fact that all the waste materials from one painting, all the broken sticks, get reused in future paintings, become like the physical form of another painting. Like it's a bit like a woodland ecosystem, like where things die and decompose, but then new things, like they feed plants and things grow. Yeah. But I also use all my old palettes, so I have palettes that slowly accumulate waste paint over a number of years, and then that painting was a palette before I painted the imagery into it. So they accumulate these waste paint, the paint I didn't get around to using, in fairly random forms, like unplanned forms, but then when I've decided it's time, I get a new palette, I prepare it like as I would a painting beforehand, and then turn the palette, like put it upright and start painting imagery into it. Well, that's the sculptural side of it. Then the image side, well, I like to keep it separate. So the image isn't reflecting the sculptural forms. It's more like it's like trying to cover over and hide away this intricate surface. So you can see like it forms like, it's almost like a mat of moss growing over the surface and creating this new flatter surface, and where the illusion is unbroken by the sculptural form. So I like that the two sides of the work are somewhat in conflict with one another. So the physical, the build-up of paint makes the image more difficult to read. It breaks it apart from different angles, so it starts to distort and break apart. Whereas the image is almost trying to hide away this rude bodily form underneath it, trying to hide away the material that makes it. So I've been, in this show particularly, I've been thinking about that conflict as being one that is kind of mirrored within like human bodies as well. So I called it memories fade, soils deepens, like to bring out that the fact that we are both like an image of ourselves that we have built up, and we see the world, we perceive the world in images, but we're also a material like body that is prone to break down and, you know, not do exactly what we want it to do at any one moment. So I've been thinking a lot about this as being a very real division that's in all of us, probably, certainly thinking about it within myself. I've come across the term in a lot of things that I've read, in people trying to speculate what consciousness might be, how it's developed, how it's evolved. They talk about the illusion of consciousness, and I used to think that they were saying that it doesn't really exist. But now I've come to think that it maybe means that it always presents an illusion to us. And that illusion is that, well, because it's our conscious awareness, it's all, by definition, it's all we're aware of. It gives the illusion that that is the entirety of us, you know. Whereas our unconscious bodies are vast, and they're underneath this conscious awareness. They're processing huge amounts of information and performing actions and initiating actions which we think of as conscious, but we only become conscious after they've already been set in motion. So there are lots of studies, like a guy called Benjamin Libet in the 1970s. He did a lot of studies that have kind of contested, but then they've been reproduced and lots of people support him, lots of people have a few issues with him. But he did studies into something called the readiness potential, which showed that he investigated, like, when people thought they'd made a decision to perform a very simple action, and when before every action, there's a surge of blood to the brain, which is like readying it's like the brain readying your body to perform this action. And he found that always, when people thought they had like pressed a button, when they thought they'd isolated the time that they were going to do it, the readiness potential had, like the surge of blood had come, I think it was 0.2 seconds like beforehand, so a considerable amount of time. And lots of people have concluded that our conscious awareness of performing actions is always like after we've already decided to act. And so, yeah, I think it's quite a startling thing. And yeah, can be quite unsettling to a sense of self, like of who we are and the image we have of ourselves as being these very, like, as deciding who we are. And yeah, our unconscious bodies have a lot to say in it, and our habits are difficult to break. And so I've lost the thread a bit. Yeah, but in these paintings, I was very interested in the point where images break down. So I think it perhaps is, like, it's certainly something that I don't think about much in my day-to-day life. But when things go slightly wrong, when I get ill or a bit depressed or what, then the very kind of way I perceive the world changes slightly. I feel it changing slightly. And the difference is, like, both my perception of myself and the perception of things around me, it's to notice the physical side more and how much is beyond, like, control or introspection or even just awareness. So, yeah. So, well, with these paintings, I want to make, like, a sculptural form that is very kind of complicated and intricate. And kind of, like, difficult to understand as well, difficult to get to grips to, difficult to see from the outside, and, like, yeah. But I don't want them to be like a depiction of, like, the interior body or anything like that. But I do very much think of them as being related to that. So, yeah, because what's inside us is, like, it's once, like, guts and organs and slippery stuff, but it's also this intensely complicated machine, or not machine necessarily, but system that is performing incredibly complicated processes. But we can't introspect those. It's a completely closed off. We have to seek outside information when we want to find out what's going inside us. So we have to go to doctors or, like, psychologists or so I want to make these incredibly complicated surfaces, but they're not meant to look like anything. Like, I mean, they can look bodily, but they're not meant to be like guts or anything like so specific as that. It's just meant to be this very complicated surface, and then the image is almost trying to paper over, hide away this intricateness. And yeah, but it can't finish the job. It can't make a flat picture surface anymore. It's always broken apart by this interior. Yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? I feel like I've repeated myself a couple of times and not been all that clear.
Well, it was worth repeating.
Yeah. So is that?
I was fascinated how some of the paint became very tactile. Like, it seems like even more tactile than I've seen in previous exhibitions of yours. That it's really kind of like growing instead of decaying.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I see a lot of natural imagery.
Yeah.
Like the body of the earth.
Right. Yeah. Oh. So I do yeah, I do think of them definitely as growing out from the board rather than decay. Like rather than decaying. Or, I think of the sculptural side as being exuberant as well as sinister and strange, as like not quite able to get a handle on it. Because it is, I do want it to look like it's full of this strange, intense life. Yeah. Is it?
Yeah, well, life is strange.
It's very, yeah, it is.
It's definitely real.
The more so, the more you, yeah, think about it.
Actually take a good look, it's very strange.
It certainly is, yeah. And each of us are quite strange too.
I seem to see some new colors in your work. Am I right or wrong?
Maybe, yeah.
More greens.
I do. I am more expansive in my blick orders these days. Yeah. So another thing is, well, with these, a lot of the titles, a few of these titles, these three along this wall, and this one actually, are taken from a book, the same book called Ridley Walker by Russell Hoban. And it's a post-apocalyptic book set 2,500 years in the future after life has nearly been wiped out by nuclear war in the current time. But the reason I chose it is because it constantly, it's written in this devolved English, and people have regressed to IA&A standards, but it's metal that they dig up, so they're aware of this great civilization that came before them. But their language is full of this, these misunderstood references, and words have changed, they've broken apart and are smushed together, and they contain all sorts of different references to, and a lot of it is to misunderstood ideas from our time. But constantly throughout the book, there's this philosophizing about themselves, and because it's written in this strange language, you really have to try and work out the language as you're reading, so it slows you down. But they constantly talk about this divide between things done consciously and things done without awareness, like intuition, or there's something called the first knowing that people have lost, and dogs used to have it, but when they went in with humans, they didn't. They built up this whole mythology around these things. And I just love how in the book there's this constant wondering about this divide within us between what we do deliberately and consciously and what is already happening. And of course, and it refers in different ways to kind of our genetic past as well, like things that are like born in us. Like we learn language, we don't have to be taught how to learn language, if you see what I mean. We have to be taught language, but we, as almost all babies, have the capability to seek out and learn language, and all these things are kind of built into our species over like millions of years. They've been, so all of these things are beyond like our conscious selves in the present as well. They're like this huge past, and and in the book they make lots of it's maybe especially apparent in this title. It's some kind of thing, it ain't us, but yet it's in us. So there's a woman who talks about how she's been thinking a lot about how there's someone else inside her, and it's not her, but it thinks like, or no, it's, yeah, it's not her, but it's in her, and it's getting tired of her. It's like, yeah, it's worn out. Like, it's Ridley Walker, 2 Ds in Ridley.
That's the name of the book?
Yeah, and it's by Russell Hoban. Yeah, it's just an amazing book. But sorry, a little plug for a book. But,
Andrew,
yeah.
are there any of these pieces where you found that your unconsciousness took over more?
So I think it's, I don't know if any is more or less, but certainly it's a big part of it. And especially in the initial stages when I'm building up the surface, I tend to work very automatically. I look for ways of distraction, like ways to, I listen to things while I'm working. I don't really think too closely about what I'm building, the forms I'm building. It's just automatically kind of very, it's not a quick process, but it's not like I don't slow down for any decision making. I'm just like building and liking that bit and adding to that. So, and it's the same when I'm in the image making as well, a little bit, but I'm thinking more about that. So that's definitely a more deliberate, and well, I'm more consciously there in trying to make that how I want and manage the painting, make it do what I want it to do, and like, yeah. So I think it's within each piece is like this, like automatically built side, and a very much more deliberate, and yeah.
So are they based on sketches?
No, I don't pre-plan anything, yeah. I always start off with, well, I either start off with a palette, which is totally unplanned, for, like physical forms that are built up from waste paint, or I build these surfaces and I try to do it as automatically as possible without any pre-planning, just building up. And then when I put it upright on an easel, when I built a sculptural surface, then things become a bit more deliberate, and I start to think about how I want the image to be and what imagery I want to put together. And yeah.
Can you explain, like, I want to understand the technique, I understand building up the surface with the paint and then the bamboo sticks, but how are you getting this top image and the detail, and like almost looks like little passageways, and like how are you doing that?
Well, so I use the sticks, the sharpened bamboo sticks. So they've got a very fine point. And I have a palette next to me. I just scoop up paint. It's just straight out the tube, no dilution, no medium or anything added. And like when you scoop it up, it's often kind of fluid enough that it is kind of almost not dripping off, but you know, you get a line that you can, or you can put it on in a dot. But it's just an accumulation of these scooped up bits of oil paint.
But
with the sticks.
So is it mixed with the bamboo shavings, or that's the structure and then you're painting on top?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So that's the initial stage. That's when I'm building the sculptural surface. So these bits here, that's when I've got it flat, and I coat lots of the sharpenings in oil paint, and then stick some straight into the surface, and then stick them together, just using the paint as the glue. Gotcha. And just put them on one by one and build these.
So this lighter color that I'm seeing on top, that's what you're calling the painting the image? Is that,
yes.
Like, that's that second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of, there are a lot of white outlines around things. Yeah, that's, I kind of see I like the way that there are sort of in-between zones where this white outline, the image, it hasn't covered over them, but it's kind of capturing them and making them a part of the image, like so it'll give a like a worm of paint that's just been squeezed out the tube. It will form like this outline around them, and then they are instantly part of the image as well. Not just paint squeezed straight from the tube. They're a worm or something in the image. But then, yeah, I like these in-between zones where the image breaks down, but it's not quite sculpture because it's a little bit. It could be an image, but you don't know what of, and it's yeah.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your imagery?
Yeah. Well, so I use a lot of found imagery and a lot of more personal imagery. So I always piece together landscapes. So each of them have a landscape on them. They're more or less difficult to see depending on how broken apart they are. But the landscapes are never really possible landscapes. They've always got multiple horizon lines, multiple sunsets, things like that, or trees that are repeated. So I'm not trying to create a coherent landscape. In fact, I like when it's a slightly unsettling landscape, one that seems like it's piled up on top of each other, and a bit too much of a landscape, like one you can't escape from. But I kind of collage them together. So I use landscape imagery from all over the place, and then just build it up bit by bit into these coherent but impossible landscapes. So I use a lot of imagery from quite commercial sources like adverts or film imagery or TV. But I also use a lot of my own photos or photos from family members and friends. I like this mix of the personal and the commercial very much. I like, that. Because, I mean, the image is a reflection of like how I,
You create these like on a sort of tabletop surface rather than like they're flat, right? I mean, they're horizontal, correct?
When I'm building the surface initially, but then I have these, I put them upright on an easel once I built the surface, and then I'm painting imagery into them, like on an easel. Yeah, but I go back and forth sometimes, but yeah. Most of the time they're on an easel because that's the part, the image painting is the part that takes the longest. Yeah.
So you're looking at a particular image and incorporating that into the work. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry?
You're looking at a particular image and incorporating that into the work?
Yeah, I paint from imagery, and some of it's just from memory or made up, but so I like that. I like that they're landscapes that are pieced together from lots of different sources. I feel like so I want to create a sense of coherence. If you really kind of get to grips with the landscape and see past the sculptural build-up so that you can see this landscape, I like it to be coherent, but I still like that it's pieced together from lots of different places and isn't possible. Because I feel like that's a more realistic way of reflecting how we build up a perception of the world and how of ourselves. And it's it's very personal, but it's also imposed on us from very commercial sources. Like sentiment is definitely piled in upon us and expected of us in certain ways. And it's from all over the place, and yet it seems coherent. It seems like we're walking through this landscape, You know, we're never aware how disjointed our perception really is. So I want the two things. I want it to have coherence, but I want it to be collaged from all over the place and impossible. And there are things that repeat themselves, and there are multiple horizons, multiple sunsets, and then you come to the physical side of it, and the sculptural build-up in it, then makes things even more complicated. When you get to the body of the painting, it starts to break everything up, distort it even further. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep ending everything I say with, does that make sense?
Are they forever wet, or do they eventually dry?
Well, they get surface dry in about a week or so, but the really thick bits of paint where I squeezed loads out, they'll be dry inside for a long, long time. But they get very stable after a couple of months. So,
what do you listen to when you're doing the automatics, you said you were...
Lots of audiobooks, some music sometimes. I like the band Half Man, Half Biscuit. I'll do another little plug. They're an English band. I like them. But
did you listen to this book?
No, I don't really want to, because it's...
you have to do the language.
Yeah, part of it is the way the language works on you, and the way it has like different associations built into the words, and so it would be a bit lost when read out loud. And also, I don't kind of get attached to Ridley Walker. It's a very intense book, and it's really quite a beautiful book. But you get attached to him, and I don't want to hear someone else's version of what he sounds like, you know. Yeah.
What are you working on right now? What's next?
Oh, more paintings. Yeah, I'm working on a couple of new paintings, and I've just decided it's time to stop using a palette, so that's going to be one of them. Yeah, and it's a great one. It's got like things coming out almost like parasitic plants or something with the cups to catch. I don't know. Yeah. And then there's another painting that I've been working on a little bit, and I'm going to carry on. Yeah. But normally it's just more paintings. Actually, I've got a sculpture or two. So sometimes I do things on pedestals that are presented flat on, not for this show. I thought it would be too crowded in here, and I wanted to show these paintings, but they're presented flat on a pedestal, and they kind of flow over onto, like the paint flows off the panel onto the pedestal and down the sides of the pedestal, and that's more broken imagery. It has so you notice the sculpture first of all, and then as you move around, like little parts of the surface line up and become a little fragment of landscape imagery. Similar, yeah.
Having paint.
It's made the same way,
Okay,
yeah.
So it's a
But
sculpture if
not
it's on
upright.
a pedestal, and
Yeah.
a painting if it's hanging on the wall.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But it's a little bit different, like relationship between the sculpture and the imagery. The imagery is more fragmented and more. It doesn't have the feeling of landscape or